Good mornings and greetings. I am delighted to be in conversation with you this morning. My name is Daniella Cook Sumpter. My pronouns she and her. And I'm going to share a little bit with you about my vision for community engagement here at the University of South Carolina. And in doing so, I hope to spark a conversation because this work is going to continue, right? So I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts, getting your questions, hearing your feedback. And I also just want to start out with a big thank you. The search committee posed some really insightful questions, so much so that I wanted to get my recording. I'm like, can I hear this? Because it was really useful for me to think out loud. So I appreciate y'all for that. And also want to give out a shout out to Autumn. She's been fantastic behind the scenes, and we always should acknowledge those folks who are doing that type of work. So I'm going to start out with this quote by Charles Payne because it's emblematic of how I approach any engagement with community. He states, part of the legacy of people like Ella Baker and Septima Clark is a faith that ordinary people who learn to believe in themselves are capable of extraordinary acts, or better, of acts that seem extraordinary to us precisely because we have such an impoverished sense of the capabilities of ordinary people. I was born and raised in Cincinnati, Ohio. I am the proud daughter of Alabama sharecroppers, born in 1935 and 1941. And in my tight-knit community in Cincinnati, we had the Fir Tree Court Civic Club. We didn't have HOAs, y'all. They were the Civic Club, right? It was one street, and we're about 20 minutes from downtown. And I grew up going to our monthly Civic Club meetings. And whenever there was something important that had to be discussed, we had it at our house because my mama was the best cook. And so one of the things that was happening, this is in the 80s, we had highways being cut through major cities to connect the different parts of the city. And I remember this day, and I was excited. It's a Saturday, Mom was cooking, so I'm gonna get Sunday dinner on Saturday and on Sunday. I'm sitting there, and we had the representative from the city of Cincinnati come to our home. And we have little houses on our street, right? And he came in, the living room was packed, and the kids were sitting on the floor because it was really important to my mother and the folks in the community that the kids were there. And I watched Mrs. Jackson, Ms. King, my mama and my daddy, my uncle who lived down the street, who migrate in packs, engage with this man from the city of Cincinnati. And I learned something that day. Ordinary people are able to do extraordinary things. They stop the highway. They never cut through our neighborhood. So whenever I go home, my street is intact, my neighborhood is intact because the community was engaged. And I learned so much in that moment about what engaged community and community engagement means, and that's how I operate. So one, I believe like Ella Baker and my mom and all of them, that young people matter. Young people are always at the table, not just on the floor, but at the table of everything that I'm doing as decision makers, unapologetically. I believe we should break bread, right? You have to build community. And I think about how you build community before you have to have the conversations about the things that might impact that community. So I learned to be relational at a very young age. It's just part of how you do the work. So when I'm here talking about community engagement, I'm bringing over 20 years of experience doing this. If I count that formative experience, even more, where I've worked with folks across rural divides, suburban areas, urban areas. I've gone into communities that I'm not a part of, but they embrace me. I'm thankful for that, and I learned to sit and listen. So that's how I operate and who I am and the ways that I operate. And in doing that, I didn't say this at the beginning. I'm going to talk about the roots and the roots of community engagement. If you don't get it now, you'll get it in the morning, right? So one of my roots, right, how I am guided are these principles that you see here. These are my guideposts. Integrity. We're going to tell the truth. And realizing that truth might in some moments be relative if it's the little t, because perspective matters, but we're going to tell the truth and be honest about what we're doing, why we're doing it, where our limitations are, but also be honest about what's driving us and create space for that. I believe in reciprocity. This is about a give and take. I look at horizontal relationships not necessarily vertical, hierarchical ones. And I'm constantly thinking about how do we make not only tables bigger, to borrow from some of my colleagues' language, right? Make the tables more expansive, but how do we create space for people to bring who they are, their perspectives, their knowledges to the problems that we're trying to solve? Respect is simply listening, y'all. Not waiting to jump in to make your point, but can I give folks an authentic sense that I'm really trying to understand where you're coming from, even if I disagree, even if it's not the perspective that's driving me. And finally, humility, that we don't know everything. And from working with and in communities, you get a dose of real humility. But what happens is when you do that, they stop highways from coming through their neighborhoods, and kids see that and feel empowered to go out and make a big difference. So how did I get to USC? Like, what's my roots? How are they showing up in the root here? I'm so glad you posed that question. So I was doing, honestly, meaningful work in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I left, I had a postdoctoral fellowship at Duke University. I'm a qualitative researcher by training, and I was with an economist for 2 years. And so in working in a very different setting than I'm used to, I grew expansively, and my first tenure track job was in Tulsa, Oklahoma at the University of Tulsa. I led lots of community engagement efforts there, one of which I'm quite proud of was an equity and education symposia. And it was amazing. We had 4 generations of family members coming to these lectures. We had really amazing speakers who were community rooted and really great food and space to dialogue. So when I learned about the jobs that were open at USC, I'm looking going, where is this place? Okay, South Carolina, I like the Southeast, I have Southern roots. And then I dug a little bit more into the university, and the thing that leapt out is a common root to root. The Carolinian Creed, right, actually has a lot of the things that resonate with me as a person. It speaks to us being open. It speaks to us being honest and respectful. It addresses that we have to have a deep concern for others. And so when I interviewed and accepted the job here, I realized that was something the Carolinian Creed is. It actually infused throughout how we operate. And even when we're not making the mark, it's there to guide us, which is why your roots are really important. And the more I dug into the university and my experiences here, I realized the ways in which community engagement is embedded and celebrated at the university. So we not only talk about it, we are finding ways creatively to acknowledge it and give folks credit for the work that they're doing. And one of the things that I was excited about and a little bit nervous about talking with you about, because I'm watching the time, was as I started to dig more and more into our university, just preparing for our discussion today, I was delighted to see that we actually are engaging across the 5 categories of engagement meaningfully. Now, I knew that from my experiences, right? I knew that folks were doing really dope service learning work, right? I knew that we had alternative spring breaks where we were serving. I knew that the University of South Carolina, the College of Education, has the oldest and largest professional development network. I knew a lot of these things, right? But when you get to look and see that what's great about our institution is that we can actually talk about enhancing community engagement, not creating the context to do it. And that's a very different conversation that I want to engage with you in this morning. And so here's my vision, right? And this, I should put it in italics or working vision, because you should co-create a vision, not give someone a vision. The University of South Carolina seamlessly integrates community engagement into its academic mission, fostering activities by faculty, staff, and students that are deeply rooted in our values, responsive to community priorities, and demonstrably beneficial. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about these 3 roots, these principles that I'm going to carry into the work, and that I do carry into the work, and connect it back to what I'm seeing here at the university. And these are the principles. We're reinforcing and relational, we're meaningful and material, and we're values driven and valuable in how we engage with communities. So first root, right? we are thinking about activities across our university community, right? So that's faculty, staff, and students. And when I'm speaking of students, I'm also inclusive of our virtual programs, because we actually do a nice job reaching out beyond the Midlands and beyond just who's on the USC campus. And what I mean by reinforcing and relational is that we're not interested in just replicating what someone else is doing, right? We're really mindful that if I know that there are folks in the chemistry department who are going to the science fair, which is true, at Richland 1, because I bumped into a colleague there, a new colleague now, that, oh, you're doing this program where you're doing an outreach here. We don't need to replicate doing that in the College of Ed with our secondary science. What we need to do is connect to you and reinforce what that is. But to do that, we have to be in relationship with each other. Another way that I see relational priorities working out with community engagement is I'm across the table from Dr. Donaldson. And it's no surprise I have a big love for thinking about civil rights and people and human rights. And I do a lot of programs for young people. I'm bringing them to campus, having discovery days, and I can always count on the Center for Civil Rights History and Research to be there as a relational partner to then shepherd these young people through their histories. I don't have to be the expert on Ward 1. I don't have to be the expert on civil rights in Columbia, because I know the experts. I can bring those folks to tables with the people that I'm working with, and that's the type of rooting that we can do here at this university. The other root is that our activities are meaningful and material. Okay, so here we go. What do I mean by meaningful, right? It goes back to what matters. What matters to you is important. What matters to a community is important. So when we're thinking about engagement, it's really a question of how are we making what matters to me connect to what's mattering to you. And it may take some maneuvering and some thinking and some space to do that. And the other thing about meaningful impact is that material is there, easy, concrete improvements. When I was organizing in North Carolina, you can see my CV, I spent a good portion of my 20s organizing. You do that when you're young, because you have left, you can go for 14 hours. And one of the things that I listened for and I was accountable to were the concrete things. It's nice to talk about it. Scholars are great at talking, but what are you going to do to make a solid impact? So I say that, and you go, well, what do you mean by that? I'm glad you asked. Here are some examples. One of the relationships that I've cultivated over the last 11 years is with the Southeast Rural Community Outreach in Lower Richland. I have a deep love for the LR community. There was a bus tour that I was able to go on when I first got here in 2012. I'll get to that later about what we should bring back. And I work best out of community, and I was looking for a community, and I met the folks in LR, they embraced me, and then I met the folks at Serco and specifically the Harriet Barber House. And one of the things I've noticed over the last decade was that they don't have no internet at that house. Now, I'm bringing high school students to the house. I've recently facilitated a professional learning experience for new teachers to the LR schools so they could learn about the rich history with community members doing the guiding. But we ain't got no internet in 2024, 2025. I am happy to report they have the internet. Partially it was, how do we figure this out? And I had to make some phone calls and talk to who can you give a nonprofit rate to. And it showed me that there are some gaps, but it also showed me we can do something in our own little small ways. And this is important for us increasing capacity for our partners to horizontally engage with us. I think about the material, the concrete benefits that come from when you think about what the iSchool and the School of Journalism does with Create-a-thon, where they're actually giving those services to nonprofits. So there are many, many more of these efforts that I'm seeing across the university, but I think that's one of our roots, because it's one of my roots. The other thing about my roots is that these activities, and when I'm thinking about activities, think about those engagement categories, right? And all the many things that go into that. They're values driven and valuable. You have to know what you stand for. right? And so one of the things I investigated was, can I find evidence in every unit that we care about engaging community? And I found evidence in every unit. I looked at the med school, I looked at the School of Journalism and Engineering and Business and Arts and Sciences. I checked out nursing. I know education, but I went back just to double check, right? And what was fascinating to me is that we do have a common value around community, belonging, and impact. So we have that, but here's the catch. Are they valuable? Meaning, they're not going to be subject to the whims of funding. They're not subject to the whims of this is what's sexy right now. And I think that's what sets meaningful, robust community engagement apart. The work that we do when you're community engaged in your scholarship and service learning and your teaching and embedding in the courses, it's a long game, right? So you're doing these short things because you're building to something bigger. And so for me, is how can we make sure that we have activities that are representative of our values, but they also are valuable. So how do we then enact this? What's our route to these roots, if we can agree and maybe massage these things, right? First, I don't do strategic plans, that's presumptive. I need to be in community. I use a co-created process. But I can give some thoughts about an approach, right? How might we think about some pathways? So these are 3 pathways that I will propose to you. One, we need to create an engagement hub. I think we need to establish a community engagement advisory council, and we also need to think about developing an interactive digital platform. What do I mean by each of those? I'm so glad you posed that question. Got some things for you. So let's think about engagement hubbing, right? When hub comes to mind, I think about activity. I think about it's energetic. I think about it's nimble and flexible. It's a place you can go and get excited. If we had time and I was doing a workshop on community engagement, which sometimes I do, I ask folks, like, what comes to mind when you think about community? How do you feel when you're in community? When have your best ideas come to you when you're trying to problem solve? Most of the time, they're in informal conversations like this. We're sitting around the table, we have a cup of coffee and some water, we're breaking bread, and you just start, vibing, gelling. Things come together. I want us to create that intentionally here at the university in an engagement hub. So think about it this way. We all may be in the Midlands, but we have the PD, we have the upstate, we have low country. We can have hub activities where if you have a service learning project that's in the PD, you may be from the PD, you may have research that's impacting the PD region. We're gonna come together as a hub and just gel and talk and think across our work. So, and across our role as a community member here at USC. So creating hubs where we can get beyond, the silo. We love talking about silos, right? But it's really just thinking about how do we connect across community, because that's really all a silo is. It's your community, right? How do we create opportunities? So the engagement hub could be built around region in our state, because we all have regional impact in our state, right? But it can also just be a place where you know that you're trying to flesh something out, and you need to be around like-minded folks who are committed to this thing called community, and you don't have all the details yet. So the hub creates a place for us to advance this exchange of ideas. It's open to community members, right? So it's a space where they feel comfortable as well. They feel welcome as well. My high school scholars can pop in and say, we're working on this because Dr. Sagacious has us doing this thing, that they can do this. And so it becomes a way where we're really connecting and fostering the type of collaborations that will continue to yield the economic and, more importantly, community impacts we want to see. I think to do that, we also need to think about establishing a community engagement council. Who's on the council? You were gonna ask that, so check it out. I think we need to have community members, and when we think about community members, think about grassroots and grass tops. We often reach out for executive directors of major or bigger nonprofits. One of my longstanding partnerships have been with Historic Columbia. So of course bring Historic Columbia to the table, but you bring the circos to the table as well. We identify in community who needs to be at our table and expand it so that voices are there, and we can get really creative in how we set up the council sessions, right? We can get to know each other, we can problem solve, we can share what's going well in our organizations. Folks who are faculty members who are there from the different units and programs and offices, students who are doing the work, graduate students who are engaged, right? And even figuring out, we got tech, bringing in our virtual folks. We can actually start to create an opportunity for us as a council to think through some of the challenges and creatively address them, right? And that's where I see the council helping us do. And then finally, we really need an interactive digital platform. What do I mean by that? There are some outstanding efforts here at the university, at the Center for Integrative and Experiential Learning. They have this really dope, here's a list of all the ways you can engage, right? And I get lost going through there, trying to make connections and figuring out how to connect. Likewise, when I go to the Service Learning Hub, here are all the ways you can serve, you know, and they have a map, which I love a good map, right? And I can see all of that. What I'm proposing is that we really need a digital platform, these handy dandy computers that we have on our thing, where I can see all of this in one place. But what's dope about what I'm proposing is this not about documenting what's going on here at the centers and at the college level and at the department level and at the program level, but I randomly bump into faculty all the time. And I find out my colleagues across this campus are doing amazing things, right? They are connecting wealthy folks who want to donate books to a school who needs books and helping them pick out the books. We don't document that type of impact, and we should. So what would it look like to create a little survey that says something like, document your impact, right? It doesn't take long to put your name in, say what you did, who your partner is, so that we can start to acknowledge and celebrate all the many ways that we are contributing to our community. And this is good for our students to see us doing that, because what happens is engaging community is a lifestyle, not a checklist item. And so we operationalize how we are documented the way that we are doing that, and it helps us understand relationships. And it also, on our digital platform, can help us document in meaningful ways community needs and priorities. For example, I was at the dentist's office yesterday, and I am community, so I like to chat with folks, and they like to chat back with me, and I'm open to that. And we had a really robust conversation about the health savings card, what can be used with the health savings card, and whether or not the whole bunny hole, right? And what came out of that conversation, it may have been 3 to 5 minutes, was most people in communities, particularly here, we're talking Midlands now, but I gather it might be true across the state, they don't understand the benefits of having a health savings card. They don't know how to use it, there's nervousness about it. I feel some sort of way sometimes too, and I'm educated, right? They're trying to not that thing. So I sat there and said, if we had this platform, I could have actually submitted this as, here's something that I know is a concrete thing. This is not a Daniella fix it. I need to reach out to colleagues in public health. There may be folks who might be in business who do some health econ, where we can come up with, here's a service, here's a program that we can offer to communities that will make an impact, because people have access to supports that they don't know how to use. And in every facet of our day-to-day lives that we research here, that we teach about here, we can make these types of impacts if we can come up with a way to communicate with each other and collaborate meaningfully. Finally, I want us to then just remember that these are my big buckets, right? That if we're gonna think about any type of plan forward, any type of route, if you will, forward, it needs to be co-constructed. That means we have to be willing to go slower than we may want to, but when we do that, we're gonna build the types of relationships that my parents and them had that enabled them to respond in a meaningful way to things that were coming that, and maybe they didn't have control over, but they were able to respond to. We have to be intentionally connected to our engagement categories. We have a really good structure here. We have something to build off of, and not every institution can say that. And so we need to be mindful of that. And we also need to be community and data informed. And I intentionally put community first because often we look at certain types of metrics. How much money did we save? How do we make this type of impact? But oftentimes the community data that will resonate and linger and keep a taste in your mouth is when I think about one of the scholars who, when I bring them to campus and they meet with everyone, they meet with the deans, they meet with associate vice presidents of this, I give them really good swag, right? If you care, you show people how you think about them by what you do with them. So we eat in the honors college and they're interacting with college students. They sat in Dr. Platt's class once we go to classes. And I would say to them when I was in the schools, working with them, it's like, you matter. You know, you matter. I'm gonna retire one day. I need you to lead. You're in this program because you're a leader. You're intellectually curious, right? You're a problem solver. You matter. You're a VIP. And one of the students said to me just randomly, we're walking across campus, we really are VIPs, aren't we? I said, yeah, you are. That's the type of data that we need to pay attention to. And how do we replicate that so that every community partner that we touch, every community that's touched by a Gamecock feels like they matter. Not because we can just do the metrics, which is good. I think metrics matter, but we also have to think about ways to create the other types of data collection. So we need these informal collaborative spaces that help us do this relational work that will help us do the long game. We need to make sure we do the meaningful and material, and the capacity piece is important. We all can't do everything. But if you know what's happening across the street, across the campus, you don't have to do everything. You do your part. And know and trust that the other community folks are doing their part. And then we can then move forward in a way that makes sense. And also that we make sure that our values are shared, that they keep us accountable to each other, but they also make sure that decision-making as a community is as valuable as the values that bring us together as a community. So thank you so much, and I look forward to chatting.